Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gersh1, and today we're going to be talking about the Unification War. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions, please comment down below. And don't forget to hit the little bell notification icon to stay updated and see if we created a video based on your suggestion. And thank our patrons on Patreon. It's because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Unification War. During the Unification Wars, also known as the Wars of Unification, the Unity Wars, the Unification, or just the Unity, were a series of conflicts fought on Terra during the 30th millennium at the end of the Age of Strife. It was during these campaigns that the Emperor of Mankind first publicly revealed himself to a desperate humanity, and began his conquest of Terra to unify the Techno-barbarian nations that dominated the sacred homeworld of mankind, and to forge the foundation of the Imperium of Man. During the turbulent era known as the Age of Strife, the Sol System and the nearby star systems that had been colonized by humanity during the Dark Age of technology were effectively cut off from interstellar travel and communication. Every world colonized by man was left to fend for themselves, and even the once mighty world of Terra, Mars, and Luna fell into turmoil. During this dark time, Terra sometimes held sway over the Sol System, while other times the rulers of Mars or Luna were dominant, but the different worlds found themselves constantly at war. During this long 5,000-year period of anarchy, fear, and violence, Old Earth, once unified planetary government, had completely broken down and been divided into dozens of warring states of so-called Techno-barbarians. Techno-barbarian warlords and their warrior hordes continuously fought over the planet, which had become little more than a massive battleground for their war of attrition. They made use of chemical, biological, and even thermonuclear weapons of mass destruction, and they slowly transformed the cradle of mankind into a battered, post-apocalyptic wasteland across most of its sacred surface. It was against this backdrop of oppression, violence, and casual brutality that the Emperor of Mankind first revealed himself to the people of Terra. In secret, he had been planning for this moment in history for millennia, ever since the Age of Strife had fractured what remained of the ancient human federation. With his massive army of genetically enhanced warriors who comprised the first units of the Imperial Army and would serve as a prototype for the later development of the Space Marines, the Emperor began his conquest of Terra with the intent to reunite the warring nations into a unified planetary government. Once unleashed, the armies of the Emperor swept before them like wheat before the harvester's scythe, until all the Techno-barbarian warlords had either been conquered outright or had agreed through diplomacy to become subservient to the Emperor's will. During this time, the Emperor created a number of military organizations, such as the Imperial Army, which would become the nucleus of the armed forces that would support his Legionis Astartes and his reconquest of the human-settled worlds. Amongst the early Imperial Army units that saw action during the Unification Wars were such venerable regiments as the Geno 52 Kilead, which would become one of the oldest and most respected regiments within the Imperial Army. Like many of these early regiments, the Geno soldiers were created through the use of some of the Emperor's sophisticated genetic engineering techniques, developed in his laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains and on Luna. The most elite of this first generation of genetically engineered super soldiers were known as the Thunder Warriors, men who were physically stronger and more formidable in combat than even the later Space Marines, though they were engineered to be vicious killers and lacked many of the more noble aspects of the Astartes. The Thunder Warriors were engineered to be the means to an end, and were never intended to be integrated into the Emperor's new realm after unity had been achieved. Through genetic engineering and selection, the standard Geno soldiers displayed many of the characteristics of the perfect human warrior. They were physically more resilient, stronger, and capable of taking more damage than any of their unaltered Techno-barbarian foes. These regiments would eventually be referred to as the Old Hundred, and would form the core of the initial military force that embarked upon the Emperor's galaxy-spanning Great Crusade in the early 31st millennium, beside their newly created Space Marine legions. The Emperor accepted the death of so many innocents that resulted from the conquest of Terra with great remorse, in order to achieve the greater good of unifying humanity and protecting it from the manifested warp and the predatory xenos of the galaxy. Unimaginably large, full-scale battles during the Unity campaign would last for weeks on end, with body counts in the millions that sundered mountains and split entire continents. The Imperial Historical Chronicles tell of the last battle of the Unification Wars, known as the Battle of Mount Ararat, which was fought in the kingdom of Urartu. It was rumored that during this final battle, the remaining Thunder Warriors were slain to a man. The chronicles recorded that the famed Thunder Warrior, Merica, known as the Lightning Bearer, raised the banner of lightning at the final declaration of unity, which established the rule of the Emperor of Mankind over the entirety of Terra before dying of his wounds. Unfortunately, this heroic version of the events was completely false. The Thunder Warriors had not died to a man during the final battles of the Unification Wars. They had been brutally disposed by the Emperor's own servants in his order. The Thunder Warriors had been betrayed by their own creator, a terrible secret skillfully concealed from the people of the Imperium for more than 10,000 Terran years. When the Unification Wars were completed at the end of the 30th millennium, the Emperor forged a new unified planetary government under his leadership. He next journeyed to Mars and met with the adepts of the cult Mechanicus. In return for the use of the Mechanicus Vast Manufactorums, the use of its Titan legions, and the orbital shipyards to construct the weapons and starships he would need for the Great Crusade to reunite mankind under the banner of the Imperial Truth, the Emperor agreed to grant the newborn Adeptus Mechanicus complete autonomy on Mars and its other forge worlds, as well as the exception to the atheism required by the Imperial Truth. This agreement, known as the Treaty of Mars, marks the true foundation of the Imperium of Man in the alliance between Terra and Mars. To learn more about the treaty and to learn more about the Adeptus Mechanicus, please check out our 40 Facts on the Adeptus Mechanicus. Let's backtrack a bit and talk about what the world looked like during the Unification Wars. During this time, there was only one remaining ocean on Terra, the so-called Great Ocean, which was the ancient Pacific Ocean. The size of the Pacific was vastly smaller than it once was, due to the vaporization of a massive stretch of the ocean during the nuclear wars that had consumed much of old Earth in the lost years of the Age of Strife. This missing portion of the Pacific stretched from the Marianian Trench down past Australia and all the way to the frozen continent of Antarctica. The Atlantic Ocean also had been largely vaporized, as the great body of water that had once been near Europe was now mostly gone, particularly to the south of what had been the Iberian Peninsula. Other, smaller bodies of water may still have remained during this time, as a great body of water is recorded to have been present in the region of Eurasia where the Caspian Sea had lain in the past. These bodies of water still exist at the start of the Horus Heresy in the early 31st millennium, but by the time of the 41st millennium, Terra had no freestanding bodies of water, having become a world completely covered by dense urban areas of massive hive cities. Within these hive cities toiled the tens of billions of Adeptus Terran bureaucrats and serfs required to keep the decaying heart of the Imperium of Man pumping. Before the hive cities existed Techno-barbarian states, starting with the Ecumendus Empire, which was situated in the Middle East in the area of the pre-first millennium Persian Empire, centered roughly in the ancient nation-state of Iran. The Ecumendus Empire is noted as being made of the wealthy tribes who were quickly to ally with the Emperor's Imperium of Man during the Unification Wars, and therefore avoided the horrors of atomic war and invasion by the Emperor's superior armies of the genetically engineered soldiers. Their genomes were uncontaminated by the inherited flaws and viral defects of other tribes, caused by centuries of exposure to lingering radiation and biological warfare, making them good candidates for recruitment into the newborn Space Marine legions after the Unification War was completed. Many early candidates were recruited from this state to become the first Astartes of the Thousand Sons Legion. The Ecumendus possessed a superstitious belief in the mystical powers of their ancestors. Emblems of Dul Carnadin, the greatest of the kings, were often used as charms against harm by the population. Now let's get into the different Techno-barbarian tribes that existed on Old Earth. Albia, sometimes called Old Albia, was a Techno-barbarian state of Old Earth during the Unification Wars, bordering northern Alta and known for its ancient warlike clans. The region of Albia consisted of towering soot-blackened castram cities. Albia is known to have clashed frequently with the Pan-Pacific Empire under the rule of the Unspeakable King, and were aided by the forces of the Emperor in this conflict. However, the Albians eventually refused to kneel before the Emperor and met his Thunder Warriors with their own proto-dreadnoughts and armored Ironside-clad soldiers. In battle after battle, the Albians managed to hold back the Emperor's forces, but only at a staggering cost for the defenders. As a result, this state presented a considerable challenge for the forces of the Emperor during the Unification. So much so that the Emperor, impressed by the determined, brutal resistance of the state's defenders, decided to end the fighting and take Albia through negotiation. The Emperor appeared before the Albia clan lords, unarmed and clothed in white and crimson, speaking of his vision for a unified mankind. He offered them glory among the stars and redemption. To the shock of many, the warlords of Albia, seeing the Emperor as different from the past tyrants, accepted his terms, and soon became one of the most zealous supporters of unification. Once Albia was under his sovereignty, the Emperor saw the Albians as a suitable gene recruit for the Dusk Raiders. Such was the suitability of the warriors of these ancient warlike clans for induction into the ranks of the Space Marines, that recruits drawn from their Castrine cities and Ironside clans. They were all incorporated into the ranks of the first founding Night Lords and the Iron Hands legions. These legions made use of Albian recruits to a lesser degree than the Dusk Raiders, who were by blood and culture shaped by traditions of the warlord of Albia, as well as the hand of the Emperor. Albion was a government on Old Earth during the Age of Strife and the Unification Wars, presumably located in what was once the British Isles, and was known as ancient times as Albion. Its ruler, the tyrannical Ulium the Red, was defeated by the Emperor forces and imprisoned in the dungeons of the Himalayan mountains. Boeotia was an area of Terra mentioned in ancient imperial records as having held out against full unification for a considerable time. While the government of Boeotia tactically recognized the Emperor's dominance over the rest of Terra, the ruling monarchy of Boeotia used all manners of diplomacy in order to avoid losing power. In a show of great patience and benevolence, the Emperor allowed the ruling dynasties of Boeotia, the Yasalti, to carry on in a semi-autonomous state for over 150 standard years, with the intention that they would integrate themselves into the government of the Imperial Terra at their own speed and with as much dignity as possible. The ruling class clung to their independence until the Imperial Army was forced to invade the province, and the Thousand Sun Space Marine Legion was ordered to crush the rebellious state. Boeotia was known for both the presence of a relatively heavy concentration of industry within its borders and an existence of an ancient buried shrine to the gods of an early age. Britannica was a small island state located in what was once known as the British Isles. The Caucasus Wastes was a techno-barbarian state located in the Caucasus Peninsula of Europe. Its ruler, known as the Ethnarch of the Caucasus Wastes, was defeated by the forces of the Emperor and imprisoned in the Imperial prison in the Himalayan mountains. The primary Imperial force responsible for this outcome was the early 18th Legion of Space Marines, later known to history as the Salamanders. Although it is entirely likely that the transhuman warriors of the Salamanders Legion saw action before their assault on the Caucasus Wastes, the records of these engagements were either deliberately lost, deleted, or sealed at the highest level. The first open battle recorded for the then as yet unmatched Salamanders Legion was the assault of the Tempest Galleries during the overthrow of the Ethnarch of the Caucasus Wastes on Terra. The conquest of the Caucasus Wastes was one of the last great battles of the Unification Wars that would see at last the Emperor as the undisputed master of Terra. But victory did not prove easy. The mutated oligarchs who ruled the Caucasus Waste presented the Emperor's forces with one of the most difficult challenges they faced in open warfare. To learn more about the Salamanders Legion's first great battle, please check out our 40 facts on the conquest of the Caucasus Wastes. Europa was a powerful techno-barbarian state composed of the territory of much of south-central continental Europe, including the Mediterranean Sea. The land of Frank was based in the territory of Western Europe, largely in the territory of the ancient nation-state once called France. The people of Frank were also known as the Frank, a fractious people before the Unification that did not take kindly to invaders. Havelock de Grasse was the last independent ruler of the Frank, leading a rebellion against the imperial rule and killing the emperor's appointed territory governor. His rebellion began in the city of Everoli, but rapidly spread until he could muster a force of 50,000 rebels, which were largely composed of unskilled militia. They eventually fought the emperor's foes at the Battle of Gadur, a line of high hills by the ruins of Gadur Bastion. There, they were wiped out by a force of less than 5,000 imperial troops, including the early generation of Space Marines from the Dusk Raider Legion. Gyptus was a small techno-barbarian state located in the northern east portion of the continent of North Africa, in the territory of the ancient nation of Egypt. The Great Mountain of the Himalayas served as the emperor of mankind's original base on Terra. Deep beneath these mountains, the emperor established the gene laboratories, where he would create the Primarchs and then the gene seed of the Space Marine legions. Eventually, the entire chain of great peaks was transformed into a massive complex known as the Imperial Palace. High Brazil was a powerful techno-barbarian state centered in the former territory of ancient Brazil on the continent of South America. High Brazil was considered the most powerful of all the South American cantons. During the Unification Wars, it was ruled by the despot Dalmoth Kin, one of the last tyrants to hold out against the emperor's forces. Once he was defeated by the imperial army, rule of High Brazil passed to Lord Ferrum Sykar, a direct descendant of Kine. Through the direct intervention of Malcador the Sigillite, it was determined that Sykar would never have a seat on the Council of Terra that preceded the establishment of the Senatorum Imperialis as the ruler of a united Terra and Imperium. High Brazil is ruled from Planalto, a massive hive city cluster. Its government is based in the hive city of Sao Paulo. The hives of Planalto draw their power from a series of massive plasma reactors buried in the heart of the city. The heart exchange process that comes from the generators means that the reactor district is caked in thick sheet ice all year round, forming a gigantic frost park 30 kilometers square. This area was known as the Winter Fields and was used for recreation by the local inhabitants. Although controlled by the Lord of High Brazil, the area also possessed a bicameral parliament. The parliament was divided into upper and lower chambers and was located at the Parliament House on the edge of the Winter Field in Sao Paulo. The military force of High Brazil were known as the Dracos and were allowed to maintain their existence even after the establishment of the imperial government. The Dracos were known to wear green scaled armor. Elements drawn from the Dracos may well have made up the regiment called the Oronti Dracs. an Imperial Army regiment that campaigned with the Word-Bearers Legion during the Great Crusade. They are described as swarthy skinned fighters exclusively recruited from the jungles of South America, and wear scaled cloaks and reptilian helmets. Germany was a small techno-barbarian state composed of the territory of the ancient Central European nation of Germany. Merica was a massive and powerful techno-barbarian state composed of the hive cities located on the North American continent. The North Afric conclaves were comprised of the territory of much of the north portion of the continent of Africa, and thrived during the Age of Strife. The Chronicles of Ursh, an ancient volume dating back to the millennia before the Unification Wars, describes the long and brutal conflict fought between the North Afric conclaves and the state of Ursh. The conclaves was eventually defeated by their rivals. The Chronicles also describe the use of dark powers by both sides that came from the warp. Nordic was a techno-barbarian state located in the lands of what had once been Scandinavia. Oeoq was a city-state of Old Earth, buried in a hollowed-out mountain in ancient Terran icebound south of Antarctica. It stood throughout the darkness of Old Night, weathering the storm of strife for thousands of standard years. People of Oeoq believed they were the chosen of the ancient Terran blighted children, and they alone would outlast the anarchy that had broken out so many other places. This certainly came from the faith in protection from the spirit of death and life, an ancient pantheon of gods worshipped by the people of Oeoq. During the Unification Wars, when the Emperor's eyes finally turned to the mountain city, he seemed to have known that soft words and diplomatic overtures would be little of use. The 17th Space Marine Legion, the Imperial Heralds, came to the city and gave it a choice: kneel and accept the Imperial truth, or be destroyed. The priest kings of Oeoq did not even hear the message before they gave their answer. Fire met the Imperial Heralds' transports, and as it fell to the ice plains, the 17th Legion began their attack. Macro bombardments came out of the snow-filled skies, and the mountain cracked under a rain of seismic charges. On the mountain flanks, siege tanks coughed out shell after shell into fractured rocks, breaking them wide open. Behind the wind came the gray armored warriors, advancing in a relentless drumroll of gunfire and the hiss of flame. After 3 solar hours of battle, the remaining populace was a huddled flock, crammed into a central cavern. With every other tunnel and cavern district wiped clean of life, the 17th Legion halted, sealing the way in and out of the central cavern. As the survivors waited in fearful silence, they wondered what fate awaited them. Their answer came in a rain of shattered stone and red fire, as the elite ironclasts of the Imperial Heralds, the Astartes of the merciless special formation known as the Ashen Circle, descended upon them like comets flung from a destroyed heaven. All burned, none were spared, and when it was done, the 17th Legion overloaded the genothermal power plants beneath the mountain, causing lava to fill the caverns, swallowing the stone idols, and exploding the city-state from the wounds in the mountain's flanks. So fell Oeoq, and the message of its death carried across ancient Terra and beyond. Faith in false gods would bring only ruin and ashes. The Pan-Pacific Empire was a techno-barbarian state composed of the Pacific Islands that had once been the territory parts of East Asia, Australia, and the Japanese islands that flourished during the Age of Strife. Narthan Doom, the tyrant of the Pan-Pacific Empire, is described in ancient sources as being half mad, half genius, and is considered the most infamous of all the tyrannical rulers who dominated Terra during this dark period. He was eventually defeated by the forces of the Emperor during the Unification Wars, removed from power and imprisoned within the great imperial prisons underneath the Himalayan mountains, releasing his people from their repression. The Nori was a Terran city enclave, a natural fortification built into the walls of a series of chasms for easy defense that had once been a part of the Pan-Pacific Empire. Venori had been one of the last of the tyrant Narthandum's domains to fall during the Unification Wars. The people of Venori did not take easy to the imperial yoke, as they submitted to the emperor's rule in silence. This changed, however, with the coming of the Crimson Walkers, a cabal of psychers, gene splicers, and warlords who had once served the last great tyrant of the Age of Strife. Bit by bit, they had gathered followers and resources, spreading a secret web across Terra. The center of their resurgence was Venori. It seemed the Crimson Walkers were determined to pull apart Terra back into the nightmare of a recent past. When the Emperor heard of the rise of this reborn threat, he is said to have spoken 4 words: "Send in the 8th." The 8th Legion did not respond right away, as its force within the Sol system at the time only numbered a little more than 500 warriors. When the 8th Legion began their campaign of fear, it started with an orbital bombardment falling from the night sky, which lasted for 6 solar hours. Following the bombardment, the artificial darkness remained. Soon a heavy downpour, thick with chemical rain, upon the millions of fearful inhabitants from the seated clouds above. The 8th Legion arose from the abyss on jets of flame, butchering any who crossed their path. The screams of terror and battle echoed through their drug-weakened minds. The Crimson Walkers responded by unleashing an army of mutant monstrosities, but still the 8th Legion came on, slicing abominations apart with lightning-shredded claws. They screamed with the voices of the dead as they fought, their speaker grills shouting out the recordings of suffering, pain, and loss. When the chasms were blazing like the mouth of a mythical hell, the drop pods fell. Reinforcements came from the chasms, cutting their way through the city, killing any they found. The remaining Crimson Walkers faced their doom fragmented and cut off from one another, until they were cornered by the figures in midnight-clad blue power armor. Those who reached the blasted borders surrounding the city found themselves hunted by the 8th Legion's seeker squads. It is said that the 8th Legion allowed many to run before hunting them down through the long hours of the artificial night, maiming but never killing until dragging their broken bones back to the chasm. Alive and healed so that they were conscious, they threw the Crimson Walkers into the chasm, and then they detonated charges along the cliff edge, severing the hanging city from the cliff faces. The screams of the 10 millions who had shattered from the fighting in the cliff-bound buildings reached up to the sky as they followed the Crimson Walkers into the black depths of Earth. The 8th Legion left the decimated city before dawn came again, cementing their reputation for the use of fear and terror as effective weapons of imperial retribution and control. The Urlus clan territory was a small techno-barbarian state located in the territory surrounding the Urla Mountains and flourishing during the Age of Strife. Beneath Mount Nardoin was the greatest forge of Urlas, where the toiling forge masters once served the Twart clan during the Unification Wars. It was here that the Primarch Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children and Ferrus Manus first met. The kingdom of Urartu was the last of the techno-barbarian states to be conquered militarily by the Emperor's forces, and its conquest marked the end of the Unification Wars and the birth of the Imperium of Man. It existed in Asia. The Imperial Historical Chronicles tell that the last battle of the Unification Wars was known as the Battle of Mount Ararat, and was fought within the territories of Urartu, atop a mountain that had once been flooded and laid underwater. Ursh was a techno-barbarian state that was located in the steppes of what had once been Russia and Central Asia. Ursh was the mightiest of the techno-barbarian empires on Terra before the Unification Wars, and was therefore the largest and strongest enemy of the Emperor's forces. Though Ursh was a strong empire, it was not as technologically advanced as several of the other techno-barbarian states. For example, the acquisition of superior military machines from the North African conclaves was the main reason cited in the Chronicles of Ursh for Ursh's decision to launch that infamous ancient war against its southern neighbors. Ursh was ruled by a horrible warlord named Caligan at the time of the Unification Wars. Caligan was described as being of cruel character and commanding vast armies of techno-barbarians. Caligan was known for wearing a distinctive artificer suit of power, known as the Armor of Pearl, which by the time of the Horus Heresy was kept as a trophy in the Eternity Gate of the Imperial Palace. Caligan's infamous exploits were documented in the ancient manuscript called the Chronicle of Ursh, which would later be considered by imperial scholars as a classic work of human literature that provided valuable insight into their pre-unification states, rise, and the war of the Ursh against the North African conclaves. The Chronicles of Ursh mentioned the influence of primordial gods upon Caligan and the Ursh. Also, the sorcerous powers of Caligan's mentioned in the Chronicles of Ursh form the main part of Ursh's military power. It is highly likely that the Chaos Gods were the true lords of Ursh, and Caligan was merely one of their puppets, manipulated to do their bidding. Despite their influence and favor, the Dark Gods failed to save Caligan when he faced the forces of the Emperor of Mankind, which eventually resulted in the defeat of Ursh and Caligan's death. The armies of Ursh consisted mostly of unaltered human soldiers. Caligan also employed powerful psykers within his army, using their arcane abilities to unleash the foul powers of the warp upon his enemies, including the Imperial Army. Some of Ursh's troops are known by names including the Roma, the Red Engine, the Lancers, and so on. The Roma were organized mercenary flyers who fought for the forces of Ursh. Highly skilled pilots, they were said to never touch the earth beneath them. They were trained to carry out pinpoint aerial attacks, and were therefore of great value to the generals of Ursh. Both the Red Engines and the Tupolov Lancers followed the command of the warlord Shenkal. The Red Engines were masters of the siege, and possessed siege engines able to raze whole fortresses or hive cities to the ground. The Lancers are described as screaming berserkers. These warriors were trained for close combat action, and proved ruthless and deadly. In many ways, they were a model for the later tactics of the World Eater's Legion of Space Marines. The Oeoq were the personal counselors of the Ursh warlord Shenkal. Their name means interprets of dreams in the ancient Urshan dialect of Low Gothic, but it is likely that they used some kind of warp sorcery to guide Shenkal in his actions. Wrath Singers, the specialist unit, was likely comprised of practitioners of sorcery that bent the power of the warp to their will. They were able to use their psychic abilities, or magic as the Chronicles of Ursh name their ability, to change the environment to their advantage, or to kill men from afar with their spells. The Yondastic bloc was a techno-barbarian state located in what was once Southeast Asia. As late as the time of the Horus Heresy in the 31st millennium, the bloc, though an integral part of the Imperium of Man, still retained a distinct regional identity to Terra. The bloc was ruled by a man named Cardinal Tang, the tyrannical ethnarch during the closing years of the Age of Strife before the Unification. He wished to return the world to a pre-technology age, burning scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers who opposed his church's views. Tang imposed a genocidal policy that consisted of forcing breeding between one genetically compatible citizen of the bloc, combined with a eugenic program that aided for the pursuit of radical hygiene through the use of compulsory sterilization and the genocidal termination of undesirables. Those that defied these enforced rules were punished brutally. Imperial history would later characterize Tang's rule as one of the bloodiest and full of death camps and genocides. Tang was eventually overthrown by his own people during the rise of the Imperium and was imprisoned in the notorious penal colony of Nusa Kambangan, which would later become a productive hive city. Tang tried to conceal his true identity and hide amongst the general population, but only a few days after his arrival, Tang's fellow inmates learned of his true identity and murdered the former tyrant. The military unit known as the Stormbird was developed by the Yandastic Bloc and used against the Pan-Pacific tribes during the Unification War. No information is available in the Imperial records to identify what the Stormbird was, though it was likely a weapon used against those Techno-barbarian states that allied with the Emperor's growing forces. And those were 40 facts on the Unification Wars. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Unification Wars are pretty much one of the most badass parts of the history of mankind, in my opinion. The Dark Age of technology is pretty cool, but I think the Unification War is just... there has to be some type of game. GW has to create some type of game where we get to see these different techno-barbarian warlords, the different tribes, just a post-apocalyptic, super grimdark, more grimdark than 40K style game, like Necromunda maybe, but like set in old Earth. That would be pretty badass. If you guys have suggestions for any other topics of Warhammer 40K, please comment down below. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.